Next up is Codner.
This is a rough draft of a story about my father, named Cahotex. That's not my father's name. Okay. Did you see that? One of them laughed while they pushed each other into the car and tumbled in over into a pile that quickly evened out along the back seat. A few of them laughed so hard they couldn't make a sentence, but tried to describe the streakers as best as a group of boys could. Boyish embarrassment and enthusiasm made noise effects and pantomime the only possible way to reenact the naked men running, bouncing, jostling from side to side across the Shangri-La Speedway in downtown Owego. It was 1973, and Steve Codner was 14 years old. He pushed in next to Marty, making room for the rest while they twitched and shoved in the confined space, still trying to talk over each other. The race was hot in their memory, and Joe and Dave, brothers, mimicked the familiar zooms and twisted their shoulders to demonstrate the dramatic turn of the racetrack, almost smacking Sam in the face with one or two elbows. "All right, boys," Marty's dad, Mr. B, sank into the front seat and adjusted the back mirror, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the boys settled. They didn't, but he started the car anyway and pulled out from the parking lot. Owego was a small town split by the Great Susquehanna. Steve lived just beyond the train tracks, 2 miles away from the Deep Well Motel, which sat in front of the Shangri-La. The town was in a valley, with hills that rose around it, covered in trees that whispered during warm nights. The area had farmland, plowed and worked, and gravel pits. It was quiet for the most part, other than the Saturday night races that drew large crowds. The sun was already falling. It was the evening, and the traffic after the race was slow, but it was always like this on Saturday night. But before Steve had just listened to the engines rip around the oval track from his house on the hill. The group of them had spent most of their summer staying up late and racing slot cars, feeding off the electricity that powered through the tracks they constructed in Marty's basement. Sam yelled above the others, "I wish our track could make those kind of turns." "Yeah," one of the brothers, either Joe or Dave, added. "They were so fast." The others put in their own descriptions, suggesting track arrangements that could improve the intensity of their races. One wanted a hill, another a crisscross. Someone even said they wanted a booby-trapped finish line. The ideas were endless, until Mr. B pulled into Joe and Dave's driveway. They slid out, waving goodbye and rushing towards the front door. "See you tomorrow," they yelled. The next to be dropped off was Sam. He got out, standing beside his open door. He turned and smiled at Marty and Steve. "It's getting dark," he said, and the three of them looked up at the sky, almost a complete sunset. "I'm excited." They sat a minute, focusing on the dark blue with a peak of orange at the bottom, until Sam gently closed the car door and decisively hit it with his palm. "See you tomorrow," he said, and slinked towards his house with his hands in his pockets. Steve and Marty looked at him, and then back at the sky as the car rolled backwards. The whole way out, Steve kept his eyes on the dimmed sun. The ecstatic energy he earlier had leveled and left the atmosphere in the car quiet and calm. A few soft words were spoken, but nothing that stirred the silence more than a little. They were on the country road that crossed the train tracks, and the short drive to Steve's house was coming to an end. "You're coming tomorrow, right?" Marty asked. Steve nodded, knowing that he would go over to race as soon as he could get free. "After church," he said, while the car turned onto a street. "Okay," Marty smiled. "Bring more pieces. I think I want to extend the track." The car pulled into the ranch-style home, 1 floor with a connected garage. Steve slid out, waving goodbye. "Thanks, Mr. B," he said, running towards the house, giving the sky one more look. The light was just a glimmer now, and as the car drifted back down the drive, past the trees, and back towards the country road, Steve opened the garage door and ran to the back. His bike was propped up against the tool bench, and he shifted it to get to the bottom shelf behind the wheel. He grabbed the box of his long telescope, hitting his shoulder on his bike as he tried to pull it free, almost losing his balance and falling backwards. With a quick hand, he caught himself, cradling the box against his chest. Steve checked the time on his wristwatch, 7:40 p.m. He took the box out into his backyard and took a good look upwards. The night was clear and a little breezy, and Steve picked a spot clear of any branches that might get in the way of his telescope. First to go up was a tripod stand, each leg kicked out. He glanced up. Next was the scope herself, separated into 2 pieces that had to be gently twisted together. His hands rotated the 2, hearing the squeak of plastic running. It snapped into the stand easily, locked into place, and Steve peered into the scope. His view was dark and blurred, so he felt along the shaft and into the lens towards town. focusing the picture gently until everything was crisp. He looked, rubbing his sweaty palms on his jeans, adjusting the telescope every few minutes. Things were still. He could hear the television from inside, and he silently stood next to his telescope with his chin tilted up. A glimmer moved across the blue backdrop, sparkling with small white stars. Steve's body tensed, and he bent to put his eye to the telescope. The comet was bright and blazing across the darkness, two tails, high and low, stretching out until the fire was nothing. It was beautiful, moving so slow across the night, but blazing so fiercely in his telescope's view. A huge fireball of ice, an oxymoron of made real. Steve laughed, following its tails with the scope, gaping at it in each phase of its route over the valley. He manned the tripod and loosened the rotation, his eyes still plastered to the eyepiece. He moved the scope over, settling directly over town, but the comet seemed less brilliant, dim in comparison to the lights below. His eyes slowly drifted from the scope, away from the comet, and down into Owego. It was glowing in the center in a way he had never seen before, eerily flickering like an orb. The night was still quiet, the wind still soft. He watched the glow, standing alone in the backyard, and then bent down to the eyepiece. Steve adjusted the direction, the focus, and peered through down into the center of town. There was fire. It was blazing like Kohotech, igniting downtown in a glowing orb. His head jerked up, his heart pounded, and immediately he ran from his telescope into the garage and grasped a hold of his bike. He pushed it free of the tool table, swiftly running along it until the end of his driveway, where it swung his leg over and mounted it in motion. Swiftly, smoothly, Steve pedaled down Gale Drive against the wind. The only sound was the chain of his bike rotating and the whisk of the wheels. The trees blurred, and the road was empty and dark ahead of him. His fingers never crunched on the brakes, and he never slowed, even when he cut the turns that spiraled him down the hill and onto the long country road. The empty fields that stood between him and downtown were vast, dark, and surrounding, but his legs pushed on, pumping the pedals faster and longer. Steve was gliding by the time he made it to town, and by then he could see the glow flickering. He followed it down streets, around corners, down alleys, and finally to River Road, right beside the dark, foreboding Susquehanna. The whole corner of the grove buildings, touching together near the bridge, was ablaze. It was hot, bright, shaking in flames so intensely that Steve halted his bike in awe, shielding his eyes. It was a great and terrifying and impossible to control. Firefighters sprayed it, but only to keep it contained. The world around was illuminated in its glory, casting dramatic shadows and searing into his skin. He stood, his bike leaning against his thigh, staring at the power before him. The flames licked for an hour, maybe two. He sat on the curb watching as completely devoured and collapsed to the building, loudly snapping heavy beams and crumbling rubble. The pile of the building smoldered, being drenched with the hoses whose water steamed upwards with the smoke. Steve watched for a time, sitting silently with his back to the Susquehanna. It was a long while before he checked his wristwatch and took up his bike, ready to start the 3 miles home to Gale Drive. They were slow and uphill, but felt like nothing. His mind and heart were racing as he pedaled onward, away from the river, past the looming fields and trees, along the country road. Everything was racing now. His mind, his bike, his heart. Steve never looked back at town, only ahead and forward through the darkness. The trees were whispering with the rotation of his bike chain. The night was once again calm. Gale Drive was the same when he got home. The houses were still and the roads empty. He slowed down his bike and gently turned into his driveway, finally settling it in the mouth of the open garage. He would get the telescope in the morning after church. He would listen to everyone talk about the fire. Steve smiled to himself, taking a slow breath as he reached to open the door. His hand took hold of the knob and turned, but it stopped short in his palm. He stopped. He twisted again. It stopped. His heart again began to pound. He went to the other door in the back, twisting the knob fiercely, but it stiffly stopped, locked. It was dark and quiet, and he was locked out, his parents, long in bed. There was no sign from inside, no light from the television or bedroom. He ran around the foundation of the ranch house, peering into the windows, hoping that someone would get up and see him outside. But there was nothing, no one, just the darkness of outside and the shadow of the telescope in the backyard. Steve moved to the side of the house and reached up above his head to the bedroom window. He stood on his tiptoes, pushing upwards until it slid, stuck, and then pushed open in a swift motion. That was the start. He leapt up, catching himself on the window frame with his elbows, his feet dangling and kicking below him in his mother's garden. The sneakers pawed at the siding, looking for a grip that would propel him further up. There was pain in his shoulders and arms, and he grappled with pulling himself further through the square frame. He went headfirst, toppling and falling, and catching everything around him as he went in. He landed on the floor and stayed there for a minute, taking a deep and silent breath. No one came through the door to check on him. No one asked about the noise. Steve was alone in the room, on the floor, until he stood up to close the window. He didn't even get undressed, but climbed into bed, where he lay still, listening to his heart shake until it no longer made noise. He lay there until his mind stopped racing about the fire and the bike ride. He lay there until his body relaxed and stopped twitching. He lay there until his eyes rolled over to the window and looked up at the dark, dark sky, speckled with glimmering white stars.